1949. Stayed there for quite some time, I guess till my early 20s. And my mother passed away when I was young. I was only 5. About a year after that, my dad met Barb Grunland, who was from Bamfield, and they had moved to Port Alberni in 1940. Within a very short period of time, he got married, and we ended up coming down to Bamfield in the summers, which was a great thing for us. It opened up a whole new world, and Barb Grunland, Mum, was one of Ebba's best friends. When we first came, there was an instant connection with all of us, and the Jennings girls were my age, and the Ostrom kids, and so we all kind of hung out in the summers. Of course, when you're a kid, you're living in rubber boots and hanging out in small boats, which is what I loved. And it would be me and the girls going along the wall, and we might get lucky and get the odd 10-pounder or something. We were all kicking and falling over each other and joking and having a good time. And one of my big thrills was always Ebba would send me up to BC Packers to get some groceries in the little speedboat. And of course, when you're a kid like 8-10 years old, this is terrific to be able to run a little speedboat up there. And so I always had a love for boats. Sort of the West Coast, boating, all these things were instilled in me early, and just stayed with me. I never consciously thought about a marine career. I had my first little boat. It was a little punt that probably was Grandpa Grunland's originally. It was about an 8-footer, and I had a little 3-horse on it, and I think we had it out at the little float house. We had a float house at Poets Nook, and we got that the late 50s or 1960, and I remember driving down there because the road was always into Sarita and into Pachina area, but not, of course, connecting to Bamfield. We arrived just about the time the float house was being towed in from Sunshine Bay, and it was Nelson Duncan in his old 1 or 2 lung Eastope. The boat was called the Raven, and you could hear it go dunk, dunk, dunk. We didn't see anything, and then finally you saw the bow of the little boat and this little float house in tow, and I'll never forget that. It was pretty exciting for a family, and we ended up having it anchored up and an approach out there, and so we would come down there quite regularly, and then we'd skip over to Bamfield. We used to hike out to Paltus. Everybody called it Long Beach, Bamfield. And when I was a kid, probably, again, maybe 12 years old, we actually packed lumber out to Paltus for this old guy named Cease Linder that was building a cottage out there. 2x4s over the shoulder. And over time, I graduated from my little punt, and I got myself I think it was a 12-footer. And I named it Bobcat, and I was probably 12 then. And I remember Woodward's in Port Alberni had like a boat division too, where the gas station is, marine department. And Joe Van Bergen used to be head of it, our famous realtor here in Bamfield. I equipped this boat with its own steering wheel and remote control and this little 6-horse engine. And I think I made my first trip down the Alberni Inlet somewhere between 12 and 14 years old anyway. We had lots of adventures out here. In those days when they put the road through, which was, I always forget, it was 62 or 64 or something like that. It was only about 3 miles of road, and there was an excavator, which in those days was just a shovel. It was all cable, and it's not the big hydraulics they have today, and a bulldozer and a dump truck, a small one. There were 3 or 4 guys in the crew, and that was it, and they plugged away all summer doing it. Anyway, the girls gave me this black and white, and it's a picture of myself and Suzanne Catherine and Marie Ostrom, and we're all sitting up in the shovel, and the operator has lifted it up in the air, and it's a picture. It's kind of cute. And we used to take tea and Ebba's Cine Twists out to these guys, part of Bamfield's hospitality, you might say. It was kind of good fun. So I always had the connection with Bamfield. Did a little deckhanding on fish boats. I guess my one summer was with Dale Garcia, and in the early 70s fished with Ray Robinson, and he had a boat called the Debbie J, which is a beautiful old wall boat. And I had thought about buying my own trawler, but I think it was 1971 I bought a little day trawler called Odin. That was the king of the Viking gods. Carl Ostrom had told me about this little boat because the guy used to come to Bamfield and day fish all summers, and he said, that'd be a great little boat if you were looking for something like that. But I never lasted very long with that venture. It's a whole different story when you're trying to make a living with it. So I ended up selling it after the season. And anyway, I started deckhanding on the Lady Rose. I don't know, I knew Joe Monterfey through school, so I was really keen. I took to it right away, and it was good fun. Before I knew it, I was accumulating some sea time, and decided that I'd go and write for tickets. I guess in the winter of '76, I ended up going to navigation school in Vancouver. End of January 1977, I got my coastal captain's ticket, and was very proud. I had taken a leave of absence from the Lady Rose, and when I came back, I realized within very short order I'd have a skipper's job there. I wasn't planning on it necessarily, but when Joe Monterfey had left to go to the Seaway Express, which that company his dad and his partner Dick McMinn had built, they were in partners with Mars Contracting, which is a logging company, and so he went over to run that, and it left a skipper's job for me. So I had trained under both John Monterfey and Dick McMinn, which was great. It was old style, Dick smoked the pipe and wore the blue turtleneck sweater and told all the sea stories. And you learned to splice rope and wire, and of course we, with the cargo gear, it was old style, lifting all the different cargoes you had, logging equipment and all that. Before he knew it, he was approaching me and saying, "Jim, would you like to be skipper?" And of course, yeah, I would. I must have started in the spring of '77 as skipper there, and that was great. I mean, I absolutely loved it, and I just really liked the work. So you would load. You'd start at 6:30 in the morning and load freight till about 8. You tried to get away at 8 as much as you could. In the summer, you often were delayed a bit with a lot of freight and a lot of passengers. And then about an hour later, the skipper would have his little collection bag. It was an old military, I think it was a gas mask bag from the old days that they'd had forever. And you had your little tickets and punch and all your extra cash, and you'd wind your way through 100 people or 50 people and tell a few sea stories. And I left the ship in when would it have been? I guess about November of '79. It's kind of a big decision. And we moved over to the Lower Mainland and got married. What did I do? I did a relief master's job in the Uchuk 3 out of Nootka in 1980. Well, I'd fly over to Campbell River and then bus out, and you did a week, 7 days on, 7 days off kind of thing. The Lady Rose had the old telegraph up in the wheelhouse, but it was all wire and pulley linkage, so it was right to the engine. So when you stopped the engine, it immediately stopped. The engineer didn't have to be there. But the Uchuk had its own telegraph, and they had kept all that, it was original. And so it was twin engine and the two telegraphs, and when you rang up, you had to wait for the engineer to get there and answer the bells. And of course he was always tending in his little room down there, right in the engines themselves. But it was hard to get used to for me, because I was used to it. I could just slow that thing down like a remote control on a speedboat on the Lady Rose. But on the Uchuk, you're doing 11, 12 knots, and you're now getting close to the dock. I rang up. They used to tease me because they said I rang up much earlier than the other captains, but I wanted to make sure he answered those bells and I could start slowing down. The thought of going into a float at 12 knots put me into a cold sweat. But I only did the Uchuk there in 1980. Well, no, I guess I did a small stint on a tugboat too, just kind of so I could say I worked on the tugs. I started snooping around and found out that I could work as a mate with Coast Ferries, and it was all freight. They had 3 ships, and that I felt was more my style. And the biggest was the Chilcotin Princess, which was 180 feet, and it was a lovely old ship. It had been a Navy munition ship, and their medium-sized ship was about 140 feet, was the Tai Princess. And then their smaller one was a wooden one. The other ones were steel, and it was called the Lockborough Princess. That was a really good experience for me, a really good company to work for, and it was a big learning curve. We went out for 10, 12-day trips, and we went as far as just north of Prince Rupert at Port Simpson. And in the summer, we would run fish out of there. They had canned fish and whatnot. And we took several 100,000 pounds of frozen fish out of Namu. And then we did all the logging camps and Bella Bella. So it really did take us running day and night, about 10 days to complete the trip. And in the summer, we would take that frozen fish out of Namu and we'd end up in Victoria, where BC Packers used to be in the inner harbor, where the cruise ship terminal is now. And I worked for them for 2 years. And lo and behold, I get a call from Brooke George, who was a friend, and he had taken over my spot a little while later on the Lady Rose when I had left. And he said, I'm about to buy the Lady Rose, and would you be interested in coming back and working with me? So by, I think it was November '82, we moved back to Port Alberni. My grandparents from here, they had moved up to Port into a new home in 1940, and my mom ended up inheriting that, and we ended up buying that. So on the Sunday run, Deb would bring the two girls and immediately go out to Brady's. And then we'd quickly finish our freight or whatever we were doing, come back from the East Dock, and then you'd have a beach day out there. So it was good for a family, and nice to be back on the island and in Port. And, had more of a connection again with Bamfield. But after, I guess it was 3 years being here, and because of my connection through Coast Ferries and whatnot, I started thinking more and more about the BC Coast Pilots. I guess it was Brooke as well. Around January '85, we both ordered our at that time about 130 charts each of the BC Coast. We wrote in the end of May, and I was lucky enough to get through. I think the 2 years with Coast Ferries had really clinched it for me. It was a bit of an arduous thing because you write 2 papers, and Brooke and I got through both those papers, and then if you pass that day, then you draw a date out of a hat. I think over that 2-week period you have an oral to do. I think you sit before 5 examiners in Vancouver, and for 2 to 3 hours they just pepper questions at you, and it can relate to anything on the coast about piloting. It's certainly a pressure cooker. So it was such a relief when he gave the nod, like he was happy enough with the way I answered the collision regulations questions, that you got in. And I always tease that I could then tell my lies or my sea stories from there. But when I came out of there, I felt like I'd done a couple of rounds with Muhammad Ali. Surprised myself even actually with never being a great student in high school, but I was motivated. I got that letter 2 weeks later to say I'd passed, and I was pleasantly surprised, to say the least. I got called in December of that year, and I was to start January 1st in my training. It was an intense period, and by the fall of '86 I was licensed as a pilot. And the first couple of years on the job were pretty intense. You go from a 100-foot vessel to 600, 700, 800 footers. Generally speaking, most foreign vessels require a pilot, a local pilot, in our case a Canadian pilot, and so we're the so-called local experts. We've been certified on the coast and worked in various capacities on the coast, and then when you're licensed as a pilot, you get on and guide these ships. So I started on my own. I felt fairly confident, so I did that for 26 years. So I guess my whole Marine career was about 42 years. It's been a great career for me. I really enjoyed all my work. I look back fondly on my Marine career. Everything still seems good, and I haven't missed it that much. So maybe I made the right decision. But